The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the event that started World War I. On June 28, 1914, 2 gunshots echoed through the streets of Sarajevo. Within seconds, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his wife, Duchess Sophie, lay mortally wounded. At first, it appeared to be just another political assassination, one more act of violence in a continent already burdened by nationalism and unrest. But history would prove otherwise. Just 37 days later, Europe was at war. What began as the murder of 2 people soon ignited a conflict that spread across continents and transformed the course of the 20th century. The First World War would claim the lives of millions, bring down mighty empires, redraw national borders, and reshape the modern world. But how could a single assassination trigger one of the deadliest wars in human history? Was it truly the bullets fired in Sarajevo, or had Europe already become a powder keg waiting for a single spark? This is the story of the assassination that changed the world. If you enjoy stories of history, tragedy, and real events that changed the world, welcome to Missing History. Let's uncover the past, one story at a time. Europe before the gunshots. Before the gunshots rang out in the streets of Sarajevo, Europe was already standing on the edge of a crisis. By 1914, the continent was experiencing one of the most tense and unstable periods in its history. The great powers were expanding their armies, building powerful new battleships, and competing for influence across Europe and beyond. Every nation feared that falling behind its rivals could threaten its future. At the same time, Europe had become divided into 2 major alliance systems. If one nation went to war, its allies could be drawn into the conflict as well. What might have begun as a regional dispute carried the potential to engulf an entire continent. One of the most volatile regions was the Balkan Peninsula. Often described as the powder keg of Europe, the Balkans were home to many different ethnic groups, religions, and competing national identities. For decades, rival kingdoms and empires had claimed authority over the same territories. Among the most bitter rivalries was the growing confrontation between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Kingdom of Serbia. Austria-Hungary controlled Bosnia and Herzegovina, while many Serbian nationalists believed those lands should one day become part of a larger Serbian state. As nationalist movements continued to grow, tensions became increasingly difficult to contain. At the center of this political storm stood one man, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian throne. If Emperor Franz Joseph I were to die, Franz Ferdinand would inherit one of Europe's largest and most powerful empires. His decisions could shape the future of millions of people. Yet despite his military background, many historians agree that Franz Ferdinand was not eager for war. He understood the fragile balance of power that existed across Europe. He reportedly feared that if Austria-Hungary launched a war against Serbia, Russia would almost certainly intervene to defend its fellow Slavic nation. Such a conflict, he believed, could spread far beyond the Balkans and draw the great powers of Europe into a devastating continental war. Only weeks later, those fears would begin to unfold. On the morning of June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Duchess Sophie, arrived in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The official purpose of the visit was to inspect imperial military exercises and attend civic ceremonies. To the public, it appeared to be a routine royal visit, but hidden among the crowds lining the streets, a group of young conspirators had already taken their positions. Each carried a weapon. Each had the same objective: to assassinate the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. None of them knew that within the next few hours, history would change forever. The assassination plot. The morning of June 28, 1914, began like any other summer day in Sarajevo. Crowds gathered along the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the visiting heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. To most people, it was a ceremonial procession, but hidden among the spectators were several young assassins. Each had been assigned a position along the Archduke's route. They were members of a Serbian nationalist network, determined to end Austro-Hungarian rule over Bosnia and Herzegovina. Their plan was simple. If one assassin failed, another would take his place. The attack would continue until the mission succeeded. As the motorcade made its way through the city, the first conspirator had an opportunity to strike. But at the crucial moment, he hesitated. The cars passed before he could act. The first chance was gone. A short time later, another conspirator stepped forward. His name was Nedeljko Čabrinović. As the Archduke's open-top car approached, Čabrinović hurled a hand grenade toward the vehicle. The attack almost succeeded, but the grenade bounced off the folded rear cover of the Archduke's car and rolled into the street. Moments later, it exploded beneath the following vehicle. The blast injured several military officers, members of the royal entourage, and nearby civilians. Remarkably, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Duchess Sophie escaped without injury. The assassination attempt had failed. Believing there was no escape, Čabrinović swallowed a cyanide capsule and leaped into the nearby Miljacka River. Nothing went as planned. The poison failed to kill him. The river was so shallow that it barely reached his knees. Within moments, he was pulled from the water, beaten by angry bystanders, and taken into police custody. Despite the bombing, the Archduke insisted on continuing with the official schedule. The motorcade arrived at Sarajevo City Hall, where civic leaders had gathered to welcome the imperial couple. Although shaken by the attack, the ceremony went ahead. Once it was over, officials debated whether the remainder of the visit should be cancelled. The danger was obvious. Another attempt could come at any moment. But Franz Ferdinand reached a different decision. Rather than ending the visit, he chose to travel to the local hospital to visit those who had been wounded in the bombing. It was a gesture of concern and responsibility. No one present could have imagined that this decision would set in motion the final events of the day. Within minutes, a single mistake would place the Archduke directly in front of the man who had been waiting for one last opportunity. The wrong turn that changed history. After leaving Sarajevo City Hall, Archduke Franz Ferdinand made one final decision. Rather than returning directly to the governor's residence, he insisted on visiting the victims who had been injured in the earlier bombing. It was an act of compassion. Officials quickly arranged a new route to the hospital in an effort to avoid the city center and reduce the risk of another attack. But in the confusion, one crucial detail was overlooked. The driver of the Archduke's car had never been informed that the route had changed. As the motorcade approached a familiar intersection, he followed the original plan and turned onto the wrong street. Almost immediately, someone shouted that they were heading the wrong way. The driver stopped the vehicle. He shifted into reverse, preparing to back out and return to the correct route. For just a few seconds, the open-top car stood almost motionless. It was a brief pause, but it was enough. Only a few steps away stood Gavrilo Princip. Like the other conspirators, Princip had believed the mission had already failed. The failed bombing, the continuing procession, and the visit to City Hall had convinced him that the opportunity was gone. Disappointed, he had remained near Moritz Schiller's delicatessen, unaware that fate was about to deliver the Archduke directly to him. Then, without warning, the car stopped in front of him. It was an opportunity no assassin could have expected. Princip drew his FN Model 1910 pistol. From only a few feet away, he fired 2 shots. The first bullet struck Duchess Sophie in the abdomen. The second hit Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Both were critically wounded. The driver accelerated toward the governor's residence, the nearest place where medical assistance could be found. But every passing second reduced any hope of saving them. Neither wound could be treated in time. Duchess Sophie died first. She was 46 years old. A short time later, Archduke Franz Ferdinand also succumbed to his wounds. He was 50 years old. In a matter of minutes, the heir to one of Europe's greatest empires had been killed. Behind the headlines were 3 children who suddenly found themselves without either parent. Princess Sophie, aged 13, Prince Maximilian, aged 12, and Prince Ernst, only 10 years old. Yet despite being the Archduke's children, none of them would inherit the throne. Franz Ferdinand's marriage to Sophie had been a morganatic marriage. Under the laws of the House of Habsburg, Sophie did not share her husband's royal rank, and their children were excluded from the line of succession. It was a painful reality that shaped the future of their family long before the tragedy in Sarajevo. By the end of that day, the gunman had been arrested. The investigation had begun. To many observers, it appeared that the crisis was over. Another political assassination had claimed 2 lives. Justice, they believed, would follow. But they were mistaken. The 2 bullets fired on a Sarajevo street had done far more than kill an archduke and his wife. They had set Europe on a path from which there would be no turning back. From assassination to World War. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand shocked Europe. But the killing itself did not immediately trigger war. For several weeks, Europe waited to see how Austria-Hungary would respond. In Vienna, many government officials believed the assassination had not been the work of a lone gunman. They were convinced that it was part of a wider Serbian nationalist conspiracy operating across the border. Although the Serbian government denied any involvement, Austria-Hungary saw the attack as an opportunity to confront its longtime rival once and for all. Yet, there was one major concern. If Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia might intervene. For decades, Russia had presented itself as the protector of the Slavic peoples of the Balkans, including Serbia. A regional conflict could quickly become something much larger. Before taking any action, Austria-Hungary turned to its most important ally, Germany. The response from Berlin was decisive. Germany promised its full support, regardless of what course Austria-Hungary chose. History would later remember this pledge as the blank check. With Germany standing firmly behind it, Austria-Hungary felt confident enough to increase the pressure on Serbia. On July 23, 1914, nearly a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary delivered an ultimatum containing a series of demanding conditions. Among them was a requirement that Austrian officials be allowed to conduct investigations inside Serbian territory. For any independent nation, such a demand raised serious questions about sovereignty. Serbia accepted most of the conditions. However, it rejected several key demands that would have allowed foreign authorities to operate within its borders. To Austria-Hungary, the response was unacceptable. 5 days later, on July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination in Sarajevo, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Artillery shells soon began falling on Belgrade, the Serbian capital. Troops crossed the border, and military operations were underway. Many political leaders believed the conflict would be brief. They expected Serbia to be defeated within weeks. Instead, the opposite happened. Serbian forces resisted the initial invasion. As fighting intensified, neighboring powers began preparing for a wider conflict. The crisis that Archduke Franz Ferdinand had feared was now becoming reality. Russia ordered the mobilization of its armed forces in support of Serbia. Although mobilization was not the same as a declaration of war, Germany viewed it as a direct military threat. On August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. Because France was bound to Russia through a military alliance, Germany declared war on France just 2 days later. Germany, however, had no intention of fighting a long war on two fronts. For years, its military planners had prepared a strategy designed to defeat France as quickly as possible before turning east to confront Russia. The strategy was known as the Schlieffen Plan. Rather than launching a direct assault against France's heavily fortified eastern frontier, German forces would sweep through Belgium, advance into northern France, and then move toward Paris. From a military perspective, the plan promised speed and surprise. Politically, however, it carried enormous consequences. Belgium had declared its neutrality and was not a participant in the conflict. Germany demanded permission to move its armies across Belgian territory. The Belgian government refused. On the morning of August 4, 1914, German troops crossed the Belgian border anyway. That single decision transformed a continental crisis into an international war. Britain had guaranteed Belgium's neutrality under the Treaty of London of 1839. Later that same day, Britain declared war on Germany. Just 37 days after the gunshots in Sarajevo, a political assassination had escalated into a conflict involving nearly every major power in Europe. The First World War had begun. The shot that changed the world. People often say that the First World War began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But history is rarely that simple. Long before the gunshots echoed through Sarajevo, Europe had already become a continent burdened by deep political tensions. The great powers competed for influence across the globe. Military spending continued to rise. Powerful alliances divided Europe into rival camps. Each nation believed it was protecting its own security. Yet together, they had created a system in which a conflict involving one country could rapidly draw many others into war. The assassination itself was not the sole cause of the First World War. It was the spark that ignited a continent already surrounded by fuel. Within only a few weeks, diplomatic negotiations collapsed. Military mobilizations spread across Europe. One declaration of war triggered another. What had begun as a dispute between Austro-Hungary and Serbia soon evolved into the largest conflict the world had ever witnessed. The First World War lasted for more than 4 years. It transformed the battlefield through industrialized warfare on an unprecedented scale. Machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas, tanks, submarines, and military aircraft changed the nature of combat forever. By the time the fighting ended in 1918, more than 16 million people had lost their lives. Around 9 to 10 million were soldiers. Another 6 to 7 million were civilians. Millions more returned home, carrying physical wounds, emotional scars, and lives forever altered by the war. The consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. Entire economies were devastated. Communities across Europe struggled to rebuild, and some of the world's oldest empires collapsed under the weight of the conflict. The German Empire came to an end as Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated the throne, giving way to the Weimar Republic. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, once one of Europe's greatest powers, dissolved into a number of independent states, including Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. The Russian Empire collapsed following the Russian Revolution. More than 3 centuries of Romanov rule came to an end, eventually leading to the creation of the Soviet Union. The Ottoman Empire, which had dominated much of the Middle East and Southeastern Europe for centuries, also disappeared after its defeat in the war, paving the way for the modern Republic of Turkey. In just a few years, 4 of the world's most powerful empires had vanished from the political map. At the same time, new nations emerged. Countries such as Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia either regained or achieved independence. Across Europe, borders were redrawn. New political realities replaced centuries-old empires. Yet peace proved fragile. The settlements reached after the war, especially the Treaty of Versailles, left unresolved tensions that would contribute to another global conflict only 2 decades later. Looking back today, it is tempting to believe that history changed because of 2 bullets fired on a Sarajevo street. In reality, those bullets did not create the crisis. They exposed it. They ignited forces that had been building across Europe for decades. What followed reshaped the 20th century and continues to influence the modern world. On June 28, 1914, 2 people lost their lives. But the consequences extended far beyond a single street in Sarajevo. They altered the destiny of nations, changed the course of history, and transformed the world forever. This is the story of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the event that changed history forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this documentary and would like to explore more remarkable stories from the past, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and joining us again for another journey into history. Until next time, this is Missing History. Thank you for watching.